You wanted a servant at your table? Here's your royal feast.
The night everything fell apart started innocently enough, or at least it wore that mask. My wife Emma had invited her parents over for dinner at our place, a gesture that on paper seemed simple, almost routine, but in reality came loaded with unspoken expectations. I spent the entire afternoon in a kind of ritual preparation, moving through the house like a host determined to make everything flawless. The oven glowed hot as the chicken roasted inside, the skin blistering and turning golden, crackling softly with each baste of garlic butter. The scent filled the air, rich, heavy, a mix of rosemary, thyme, and lemon that seeped into the curtains and drifted down the hallway. Pots simmered on the stove, carrots, parsnips, and potatoes seasoned with sea salt and oil, each giving off earthy warmth. A loaf of fresh bread cooled on the counter, its crust snapping when I pressed it with my fingertips. The house was quiet except for the jazz I'd set playing low in the background. Notes of saxophone weaving lazily through the silence. The lighting was carefully staged, lamps dimmed to cast soft golden pools on the table, shadows falling in deliberate patterns across the walls. Emma always said lighting made people feel welcome, though the irony wasn't lost on me. At one point, I paused at the dining room mirror, adjusting the collar of my dark green button-down. It was the one she had given me 2 birthdays back, claiming the color brought something sharper into my expression, like seriousness drawn out of hiding. I tugged at it again, trying to convince myself that this was just a family dinner, just another evening. Yet deep in my chest, there was a pressure I couldn't shake, an unease that throbbed like a warning drumbeat before a storm. When Emma greeted me at the door, the performance slipped into place. Her kiss on my cheek landed quick and cold, her smile too practiced, stretched thin over something brittle. "Glad you made it," she said, her voice almost polite, the way one might greet a colleague rather than a husband. Her eyes flicked away before they could meet mine. Inside, the dining table had been transformed into a stage. 6 places were set with military precision. At the head sat her parents, Richard and Patricia, arranged like royalty presiding over their domain, their chairs angled subtly outward as if to claim the space. Her younger sister, Nicole, slouched beside them, her phone already glowing in her hand. My place was opposite theirs, a position that felt more like an opponent's bench than a seat at the family table. The table itself was immaculate. Expensive red wine breathed in crystal decanters, the glass catching and scattering light. Cloth napkins had been folded into sharp triangles, balanced with mathematical accuracy. The silverware gleamed, lined up so evenly it looked measured by a ruler. Dishes of roasted vegetables glistened, steam rising in faint curls that fogged the air above the plates. From where I sat, the aroma of rosemary and butter mixed with the sharp scent of polished wood and the faint metallic tang of the wine. Despite all that preparation, the room felt suffocating, the air thick with an invisible weight pressing down on the skin. We all sat down, chairs sliding across the hardwood with exaggerated creaks. The first few moments passed in stilted silence, broken only by the sound of utensils against porcelain. We traded what could only be described as polite small talk, words thin as tissue, skimming surfaces that had no depth. When I mentioned a recent business trip to San Francisco, Patricia blinked at me slowly, her face blank, as though I'd just claimed I'd returned from the moon. Nicole hardly looked up from her phone, swiping and tapping between bites of bread, her mouth chewing in absent rhythm. Richard, meanwhile, sat with his elbow propped on the armrest, one hand idly tugging at his shirt sleeve before settling his gaze squarely on me. His look was unmistakable, pure contempt, sharp and unfiltered, like I'd left fingerprints on something he considered sacred. Then the inevitable unfolded. Richard placed his fork down with a deliberate clink that seemed louder than the jazz humming in the background. He took his time dabbing the corner of his mouth with a napkin, movements slow and precise, like an actor following stage directions. The scrape of his chair against the polished floor echoed harshly as he stood. He was still chewing his last bite when he finally spoke, eyes burning with hostility already primed. "You know what?" His voice came out louder than necessary, cutting across the room. "I'm completely tired of pretending you actually belong here with us." Everything froze. The air itself seemed to stop moving, the silence ringing in my ears. I set my fork down carefully, trying not to let the metal clatter. My eyes lifted to meet his. "Excuse me," I asked, voice even, controlled. "You heard me perfectly well. he snapped, jabbing his finger toward me, his knuckles pale with tension. You're not one of us. You never have been. You're just some lowlife, completely uneducated trash who somehow tricked my daughter into marrying beneath her station. A chill carved straight through me, sharper than any winter night. Yet what struck deeper than his insult was the silence that followed. No one flinched, no one protested. Patricia sat motionless, then slowly inclined her head, a faint nod that carried the weight of rehearsed agreement. Honestly, Marcus, it's humiliating for all of us, she added, her words dripping disdain. The way you talk, the way you dress, the way you keep trying so desperately to act like you fit. Emma should have married someone so much better. I turned toward Emma, desperate for something, defense, outrage, even hesitation. She was the woman with whom I had built Sunday morning rituals, the one I had whispered fears and plans to in the dark, the partner with whom I had shared a bed for 5 years. And yet she sat perfectly still, eyes locked on her plate, as if it contained some secret map she couldn't look away from. Her silence screamed louder than Richard's insult. It wasn't neutral, it was betrayal sculpted into stillness, deliberate and cruel. In that instant, clarity struck. I saw myself not as a husband or a son-in-law, but as a character in a play everyone else had grown tired of performing. My breath came slow, steady, but my body trembled with the energy of suppressed rage. I could have unleashed it, flipped the table, shouted about the multi-million-dollar contracts I'd closed just last quarter, listed the companies I'd acquired, the staff I employed across 3 cities. I could have shoved Forbes articles in their faces, forced them to choke on the proof of who I was. But I didn't. Instead, I reached up, adjusted my collar calmly, and stood. My movements were deliberate, slow, a refusal to let them see me flinch. I looked at each of them in turn. Richard with his hostility, Patricia with her disdain, Nicole with her absent disinterest, and Emma with her silence. My heart pounded, not with fury, but with a clarity that cut deeper. I wasn't being thrown out of a dinner. I was being set free from a cage I hadn't realized had closed around me long ago. I turned to face Emma one final time, my eyes searching her expression for the faintest flicker of humanity. You're really not going to say anything at all? My voice was calm but carried the heavy edge of a man handing out one last chance. For the briefest moment, she shifted, her lips parted slightly as if words were on the edge of forming. Her fingers tightened around the stem of her wine glass, her knuckles whitening. Then, like a door slamming shut, she closed her mouth again without a single syllable escaping. Her gaze dropped instantly back to her plate, tracing the rim of her fork across the porcelain as though she'd found some invisible pattern worth studying. She couldn't meet my eyes. The silence that followed rang in my ears louder than any accusation could have, so I gave them the simplest possible response. One word that carried the weight of 1,000 speeches I refused to waste on them. Okay. No bitterness, no flourish. Just finality, cold and clean. I turned my back without hesitation, the legs of my chair scraping against the polished hardwood with a harsh, definitive note. My footsteps carried me across their pristine dining room, each click of my shoes against the expensive floor echoing rhythmically, steady as a metronome. No farewell toast, no dramatic exit line, only the sound of breathing pulled deliberately under control and the absolute certainty in my stride. I didn't bother reaching for my coat on the way out. I didn't even glance back at the table where their eyes followed me like silent vultures. My pride didn't come with me either because they hadn't earned the power to dent it. Stepping through the door, I was greeted by the night itself, the cool air rushing into my lungs like a long-lost friend. The chill carried the smell of damp earth and faint traces of pine, more honest than anything I'd left behind in that suffocating house. It brushed against my skin, sharp but cleansing, as though the world itself was stripping away the residue of their disdain. I slid behind the wheel of my car, the leather cold under my hands, and closed the door with a satisfying thud that sealed out the stale atmosphere of betrayal. I started the engine but left the radio off, choosing silence instead. The quiet wasn't empty. It wrapped around me like armor, a protective cocoon each mile I drove, putting more distance between me and their poisoned table. The streetlights stretched out in long, golden streaks across the windshield, blurring into rivers of light as I pressed forward into the night. What they didn't know, what none of them had ever cared enough to ask, was that I wasn't some pitiful hanger-on clinging to scraps of their approval. I had real options, real power, actual wealth that wasn't borrowed, gifted, or inherited through some privileged bloodline. They looked at me as if I were a charity case with a haircut, someone who'd lucked into table manners and nothing more. But the truth they could never comprehend was this. In the last fiscal year alone, I had earned $45 million. Not theoretical, not inflated by family connections. $45 million earned by my own hand, pulled from sleepless nights, calculated risks, and the kind of relentless effort people like them couldn't even spell correctly if you handed them the definition. Every dollar represented sacrifices they'd never imagine, years spent grinding through deals, long flights taken alone, contracts studied until dawn, and decisions that had carved entire companies out of nothing. And yet, I felt no need to prove any of it in that dining room, because anyone capable of looking a man in the eye while stripping him of dignity without blinking once was never worthy of the truth anyway. By the time I pulled into the driveway of my real home, the one I had bought outright with money they didn't even know existed, my chest no longer felt tight. This was my property, my walls, my taste. Every piece of furniture had been chosen because it matched my life, not because it met some family's stiff tradition. I stepped inside, felt the space breathe around me, and realized I wasn't broken, not even close. I was free, genuinely, completely free, in a way I hadn't been for years. They believed they had delivered humiliation to me on a polished silver platter, that they had cut me down and revealed some fraud. But the reality was far simpler. They had given me something I hadn't had in years. A blank slate, a clean page, a wide open horizon, and I would build something new on it, something magnificent, without them, and beyond their reach forever. By the following morning, I was already in Florida, not running away in defeat or retreating from confrontation like a coward, but arriving exactly where I had already carefully planned to be well before last night's pathetic performance masquerading as a family dinner party. The road had been legitimately long and exhausting, but I'd made the entire drive in one continuous stretch without stopping once. No music playing through the car speakers, no podcasts filling the silence, just the steady hum of the car engine and thoughts tumbling through my mind like dominoes falling in careful sequence. When the electronic security gates to my beachfront property slowly opened with a quiet mechanical whir, that engine hum finally quieted down, and the chaotic outside world immediately ceased to matter at all. This place was entirely and completely mine in every sense. 5 generously sized bedrooms, minimalist architectural design throughout every room, all white stone and floor-to-ceiling glass panels with clean lines and panoramic windows that invited the Atlantic Ocean inside like it was a welcome permanent guest. I had bought this property completely outright with cash. No mortgage payments hanging over my head like a sword, no co-signers required or needed, just me, a simple wire transfer, and the kind of substantial bank account balance you don't casually discuss over dinner with people who wrongly assume your worth begins and ends with whatever name happens to be printed on your college diploma. I stepped inside through the heavy front door and closed it firmly behind me, effectively sealing off all the external noise and chaos from everything that had come before this pivotal moment. I dropped my overnight bag carelessly in the entryway, kicked off my shoes, and for genuinely the first time in what felt like forever, I breathed deeply and fully with my entire lungs expanding completely. The air inside smelled distinctly like ocean salt and warm sunshine, like the specific kind of peace you actually have to earn through hard work rather than accidentally stumble upon through luck. I walked barefoot across the polished wood floors and headed straight for the back deck, where the endless ocean patiently waited exactly like it always did, vast and completely non-judgmental about anything human. I poured myself a generous cup of fresh coffee, strong and black and piping hot, and settled comfortably into the teak chair directly facing the horizon line where sky met water. From this particular vantage point, the sky looked impossibly wide and expansive, like it was deliberately making space for something entirely new to enter my life. My phone started buzzing insistently with incoming notifications, but I didn't immediately reach for it to check. I didn't need to see it right away. I already knew exactly who would be calling me. Jake, my executive assistant, punctual to an almost obsessive fault about everything. Instead of answering immediately, I simply sipped my hot coffee slowly and listened carefully to the waves rolling in steadily against the shore. They didn't ask me to explain myself or justify my existence to anyone. They didn't demand to see expensive degrees or verify my family pedigree and bloodline. They didn't insult me at dinner tables dressed up in judgment and expensive wine glasses. They just whispered softly what my own wife had never managed to say out loud. You built this entirely on your own terms, and nobody can take that accomplishment away from you now. Eventually, I did pick up my phone to check, because the world I had built doesn't just conveniently pause or stop, because some people finally showed me their true colors. "Morning, Jake," I said, my voice completely steady and professional despite everything. "Boss, welcome back," he responded efficiently without missing a beat. "First thing on the agenda, the Dubai investor wants to move our scheduled meeting up from next Tuesday to this Friday instead. He's actively trying to expedite the entire deal and close faster." I nodded to myself, thinking it through. "Good news. Schedule him for the afternoon time slot. I want time to breathe and prepare first thing in the morning." "Understood completely," Jake continued without pause. "You've also got the major press preview event for the fintech platform rollout on Thursday morning. Full media coverage with the exclusive Tech Insider feature piece we've been planning." I was already shifting mentally into the professional headspace that genuinely felt more like home than any family dinner ever had or would. "Also, Rafiq just confirmed the Miami rental acquisition deal," Jake went on with clear excitement in his voice. "Everything officially signed this morning. We now own 72 individual units spread strategically across 3 separate buildings in prime locations. Construction wraps up completely in 10 weeks on schedule." I allowed myself a slow, satisfied smile at that news. Perfect timing on that. Jake paused briefly before continuing. "Also, your attorney followed up on all the legal paperwork regarding the prenuptial agreement situation. He specifically asked me to let you know you're completely untouchable from a legal standpoint on everything." That particular piece of information actually made me chuckle quietly to myself, not out of arrogance or petty pride at all, but out of pure, simple clarity about the situation. Emma's family had automatically and incorrectly assumed I'd come to them with open palms and empty pockets begging. What they'd never bothered to realize or investigate was that I'd built an entire business empire they would never be capable of understanding in a million years, let alone touching with their entitled hands reaching for what wasn't theirs. I hadn't left that disastrous dinner empty-handed at all. I'd walked out with everything that actually mattered in life, my dignity still completely intact, my freedom, my control over my own destiny, and the law firmly positioned on my side, protecting everything I'd built from scratch. I ended the call with Jake feeling energized and leaned back comfortably in the chair, letting the warm morning sun directly heat my face. The deck overlooked a private stretch of pristine beach that most people only saw in expensive travel brochures or luxury vacation advertisements. It stretched out before me like a promise I'd made to myself years ago and had actually kept through determination. Every single palm tree swaying in the breeze, every piece of carefully chosen stone tile, every individual grain of wood in this place was mine by right of purchase. Designed to my specifications, paid for with money I'd earned, legally protected by ironclad documents. I wasn't some lucky guy who'd accidentally stumbled into wealth through fortunate family connections or pure chance. I was a builder by fundamental nature and calling, and I'd built everything quietly and deliberately while others doubted. I'd built while they were actively laughing at my ambitions, while they were dismissing my potential completely, while they were bragging endlessly about inheritance checks and old money that had taught them absolutely nothing about actually earning anything themselves through hard work. I finished my coffee and walked through the house slowly, past the abstract artwork I actually understood and genuinely appreciated, past the shelves of books I'd read multiple times and learned from, through the modern kitchen where I prepared every single meal with my own hands. No hired staff rushing around, no private chef cooking for me, just me and my hard-earned peace and quiet. I wasn't in the active process of healing from some fresh wound that still bled. I'd already healed completely. I was simply removing the last lingering traces of unnecessary noise from a life that was already too full and meaningful to make room for people who'd never bothered to understand it or appreciate what I was building. It took exactly 3 weeks for their deliberate silence to finally break. For 21 consecutive days, there wasn't a single word from Emma at all. Not a text message, not a phone call, not even a brief "we should talk" email. I honestly assumed that was the direction both of us were heading now. Separate paths, silent, and completely final. And I was genuinely fine with that outcome. I wasn't sitting by my phone, waiting anxiously for her to reach out. I wasn't refreshing my email inbox obsessively every few minutes. I was actively building my future with purpose. While they let silence grow like mold in dark, forgotten corners, I was steadily laying down the next major phase of the life they never bothered to ask about or care about. The tech firm in Boston had finally come around on my acquisition offer after months of negotiation. We'd been circling each other cautiously for what felt like forever, but now that my fintech platform's growth chart had shot up nearly vertically, their tone had shifted dramatically from skeptical and dismissive to genuinely eager and interested. I was leading the acquisition negotiations myself, completely hands-on with every detail, because I trusted nobody else to speak the language of ambition and genuine hunger the way I could from experience. I spent my days on intensive video conference calls with corporate lawyers and chief financial officers, constantly toggling between complex analytical dashboards and detailed financial forecasts that made one thing abundantly clear to everyone involved. We were just getting started on this journey upward. The Miami rental project was also moving forward rapidly and successfully. 72 units currently under active redevelopment, with most of them already leased through advanced pre-sales agreements. I'd created an entire self-sustaining ecosystem, rent the properties to quality tenants, manage them efficiently and professionally, reinvest the profits intelligently into more growth. My team was relatively young, but incredibly sharp and hungry, and they understood my fundamental rules perfectly. Absolutely no corners cut ever, no flashy nonsense for appearances, and absolutely no one disrespects where we came from or how we got here. It was during one of those particularly long workdays, mid-negotiation with our legal counsel team about contract specifics, that my phone suddenly vibrated right off the edge of my desk onto the floor. I glanced at the screen after picking it up. 16 missed calls showing, every single one from an unknown number. At first, I assumed it was just annoying spam calling, probably aggressive real estate brokers trying to sell me another coastal property I didn't need, or lenders I had no use for, or journalists fishing desperately for a quote now that my name had started circulating in serious mid-cap investment circles. I ignored it all completely without a second thought. Then came the voicemail notification alert. I pressed play somewhat casually, sipping from a bottle of spring water, fully ready and prepared to delete the message the moment I heard obvious nonsense. But the voice that came through my phone speaker actually froze me in place completely. "Marcus, it's Patricia." The pause she deliberately left after stating her name felt loaded and rehearsed, like she'd practiced saying it 10 different ways in her head before finally recording this particular version for me to hear. "We really need to talk with you," she continued, her voice carrying forced urgency. "I know things escalated badly that night, but there's a lot you don't understand about the situation. It's actually urgent and important. Please just call us back when you can." She sounded exactly like someone who'd been practicing sincerity repeatedly in the mirror, but hadn't quite mastered the authentic delivery yet. I deleted the message without even finishing listening to it. Not out of anger or spite at all, but out of simple, pure clarity about what this represented. This was Patricia, the same exact woman who'd called me trash while holding a wine glass in her perfectly manicured hand with a smirk on her face. The same woman who couldn't look me directly in the eye unless it was specifically to cut me down to size methodically. Now she suddenly wanted my attention desperately. I leaned back in my office chair and actually laughed out loud. Not bitterly, not loudly, just a short, genuine laugh of recognition and understanding. Because the cycle was so completely and utterly predictable when you really thought about it. The exact moment people realize you're not drowning like they'd secretly hoped you would, they suddenly pretend they were the ones who'd been throwing the life raft all along to save you. I didn't respond to her message because I was genuinely busy doing meaningful work. Busy finalizing important contracts worth more than their entire combined net worth. Busy overseeing complete branding updates for the Miami residential complex project. Busy hiring qualified staff for the support center we were opening in Atlanta, specifically to give underrepresented youth a real foot in the door to the finance industry. But they weren't done trying to reach me, apparently. The calls just kept coming steadily through. Unknown numbers, blocked numbers, voicemails growing increasingly emotional and desperate with each passing day. "Emma's been going through such a difficult time lately," Patricia said in one particularly desperate message. "She hasn't been herself at all. Please, if you'd just let us explain everything properly and talk." Where exactly was this burning urge to explain when Richard had called me a lowlife over their expensive dinner table? When Emma had sat in frozen silence and let them systematically shred me apart while she poured herself another glass of Pinot Noir? when they'd made judging me their primary family bonding activity for the evening. Every single day I ignored their increasingly desperate calls was another day I invested meaningful time and energy in people who actually respected me and my work genuinely. Later that evening, Jake messaged me with more good news. Heard back from Tech Tribune, he wrote. They want to feature you prominently in their self-made entrepreneur issue. You interested? I replied with a simple, immediate yes. The man they dismissed without any hesitation whatsoever was the exact same man now being actively pursued by major magazines, serious venture capitalists, and global investors. And they desperately wanted back into that world they'd kicked me out of. But people don't get to mock your roots mercilessly and then ask for shade when the tree finally grows tall and strong. Next morning, my intercom buzzed. Mr. Chen, the concierge said, voice hesitant, there's an older couple downstairs in the lobby. They claim they're your in-laws and need to speak urgently. I didn't answer right away. This was the next phase of their performance. Tell them I'm unavailable, I said calmly, and remind them this building doesn't allow unregistered guests past the lobby. I turned to the security screen. There they were, Richard and Patricia by the concierge desk. They didn't recognize this world because they'd never believed I could build one. But what stood between us now wasn't just concrete. It was proof I didn't need them. They'd come because they'd seen headlines, heard whispers. An hour passed. Eventually, the concierge called. They're leaving now, sir. I just nodded and resumed my work. Emma called just after sunset. I answered. For a moment, just breathing. Then her voice, softer than I remembered. I didn't know they were going to say those things. I wanted her to hear the quiet she'd left behind. They just got carried away. Emma, they unloaded years of how they really felt. I know. Did you defend me? The simplest question, but it split everything open. No, that was it. No, she said again. I froze. I didn't know what to say. You just had to choose me. I closed my eyes, remembering our wedding. I thought we were a team. You know the thing about betrayal, it's not always a knife. Sometimes it's just the person who's supposed to catch you stepping aside. I've been replaying it constantly. When my parents came to see you, I thought maybe, no, that was about them erasing the cost of their arrogance. And not once did I hear from you. You picked silence, and silence during betrayal is just as loud as the betrayal itself. I still love you, she said desperately. But love wasn't the issue. Loyalty was. I hope you find peace, I said finally. Is this goodbye? It's just clarity. And I hung up. The celebration wasn't loud, just my team at my Miami penthouse. 12 million, Rafiq said. Seed round closed, to Marcus. Everyone raised glasses. The article dropped Tuesday morning. The Quiet Architect, how Marcus Chen built a $45 million empire after being dismissed. My photo on the deck. They covered everything. My single mother who worked hospital nights, coding in a mechanic shop for $200 monthly, wearing the same shoes for 3 years. The quote that stuck, you don't have to clap for me now because the silence taught me how to clap for myself. My sister sent screenshots, Emma's family chat. He's embarrassing us. They still didn't get it. Days later, my lawyer called. Frederick's advisor reached out. They're hoping you might extend a family loan for property tax issues. I laughed. Send them our standard rates. No favors. They declined, calling the terms predatory. But there's nothing predatory about transparency. 6 months later, Emma's final letter arrived. This is the last letter I'll send. I just want you to know we were wrong, all of us, me most of all. If there's any space in your life where we can exist, I'd be grateful. I wrote back once. You taught me what it felt like to be truly unwanted, that pain could have destroyed me. But I used that silence. I turned it into a fortress. You are forgiven, but you will not be invited in, because I no longer answer to people who only clapped when I stayed small. Today I run StoneRise, a funding and mentorship program for overlooked founders. Our 10th mentee just signed, a 22-year-old who built an AI model in his dorm. I'm tired of knocking on doors that were never built for me, he said. Then let's build our own. That's real legacy. I built my life from the floor of rooms I was never supposed to enter. Now I'm building doors for others. They threw away what they thought was trash. I turned it into something they'll never touch. Not because I needed revenge, but because I finally learned I was never trash. They just didn't recognize value when it didn't come dressed in their reflection. I'm not bitter. I'm not broken. I'm just done. And in that clarity, I've built something lasting.